Hi everyone, my name is Liz I Read and welcome to another video. So this video is a recommendations video for if you like Shadow and Bone, then you will like these other titles. Before we go on to the recommendations, I should probably talk about Shadow and Bone. If you don't know what this is a young adult fantasy romance set in Ravka in its own fantasy world. We follow Lena and she is an orphan. She works for the army as a map maker. She's in training and she has to go into the fold. The fold is this big expanse of darkness that cuts Ravka in two, and there's dangerous creatures in the darkness or the fold. She has to cross the fold with her and the other people in her regiment, I guess. While she's traveling through the fold, there's an attack. Once the attack happens, she discovers her powers. She has some kind of light powers. In this world, there are people called Grisha who have these magical powers, who work with fire or water, are heart renders, so they can control your body or control your heart. There's healers, there's all different types of magics in here, and hers is specifically with light. She is taken to the little palace to train and trying to develop her power. There is a love triangle in here between the Darkling and her best friend Mel from growing up. That is the main concept of Shadow and Bone, at least book one. This is a trilogy. It's part of the Grisha verse where there's multiple series in this world. This book is being made into a TV show, and so if you've read this, I have some recommendations for you that you may also like. So my number one recommendation, first of all, is The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. Again, this is a fantasy world. It's a trilogy. Her name is Leah, and she is on the run. She is betrothed to a prince of a neighboring country for political reasons, and she doesn't want to be a part of that. So on her wedding day, she runs away with her maid. While she's on the run, there's two people pursuing her. The prince she jilted at the altar, and an assassin who's sent to kill her. Ultimately, this is more of a mystery. You don't know who is who. You don't know which one is the assassin and which is the prince. But the reason why I'm recommending this, because for one thing, it's a YA fantasy, but also there's a lot of similarities. There's a love triangle in here, just like in Shadow and Bone. Also, there's this element of religion. In Shadow and Bone, the religion is surrounding saints, which I think are basically famous Grisha or people who have powers. Here, there is a religion. It's around kind of the magic in here. There isn't an explicit magic like there is in Shadow and Bone, but there is kind of a knowing. I think that's what they call it. And Leah, she has this kind of magical, she has this magic of kind of knowing. I don't think it's called that. I can't remember what it's called, but she just knows what to do sometimes. If she's in a bind and she is listening to her internal voice or whatever, she can get out of scrapes. She knows what to do. I think the right way to describe it is a knowing, and the religion is surrounding that in here. And so those are the type of parallels that I see. The other parallel is the romance where there's one character who is morally gray, and you don't know if you can trust them or not. Kind of reminds me of the Darkling a little bit. Also, the villain, who is not in book one but in book two of the series, is extremely sympathetic, kind of like the Darkling. So if you like all those elements, then I definitely recommend this one. The next book I highly recommend if you like Shadow and Bone is Truthwitch by Suzanne Dennard. I recommend this one mostly because of the magic system. Just like in the Grishaverse, the magics in here are widely. There's lots of different magic you can have. So people in here are called witches if they have magic, and there's water witches, there's fire witches, there's truth witches in this case, there's blood witches. And so the magic system in Shadow and Bone does remind me of Truthwitch. There's no love triangle, but there might be later on in the series, but there is 2 romances that are happening in here. One romance is with, again, another morally gray character who is slightly sympathetic. They may or may not be a villain, so that kind of reminds me of The Darkling. It's an adventure story, and this one, I should say, we follow Safia and Isolde, and they're best friends. They're thread sisters, so that means they're each other's person. They love each other. They're sisters, basically, and they take care of each other. Unfortunately, Safia is on the run because there's people after her because she's a Truthwitch, and that power is sought after, and people want her for their own purposes. And Isolde, she's a thread witch, so she can see like the connections between people and how they relate to each other. And it's their story and their adventure. Again, this is a fantasy, so it's this unique fantasy world. I definitely highly recommend if you're looking for a new one. The next recommendation I have is Graceling, written by Kristen Cashore. Again, another trilogy, again, another young adult fantasy. Again, this one I recommend mostly for the magic system. In the Graceling, people have different graces, so that means they're exceptionally gifted at a specific thing. It could be anything. Some people can be gifted with baking, someone could be gifted with climbing, someone can be gifted with lying. And our main protagonist, she's gifted with killing, unfortunately, and she is the king's kind of like champion. She goes around and make sure people is in line, and she kills for the king, basically. And it's her story. She falls in love with the prince. They have their own adventure. I read this a long time ago. I barely remember much, but I remember really enjoying it. There is a survival element. I know the main protagonist, she has to save someone, and they're like traversing through like dangerous lands. It's a trilogy, but each book is kind of its own entity. I really enjoyed Fire, which is book 2, and the 3rd book is Bitter Blue. I definitely recommend this if you're looking for, again, another young adult fantasy with a really interesting magic system. The next book I have to recommend is Entwined. This is very different from all the other ones. It is not a fantasy. It's actually a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses. I recommend this one because of the villain, I guess you can say, or this mysterious man who kind of reminds me of the Darkling. You're not sure whether you can trust him or distrust him. But anyways, the concept of the story is there's these 12 young girls, they're all sisters, and their mother tragically dies, and it's about them going through this grief. And the one connection they feel to their mother is through dancing, but they're in mourning, so it's not permitted to dance. So every night, I think she's the oldest, I can't remember, but one of the sisters finds the secret passage where they can go down, and there's this like magical place in their home / castle. And they go down every night to dance, and it's kind of their way of coping. The person who is the keeper of this pavilion is this very mysterious man, and you can't tell if he is friend or foe. And story goes from there. I read this a long time ago again, but I really, really loved it, and he really reminds me kind of like a Darkling-like character. So in a lot of ways, it is kind of a love triangle. There is someone else who is possibly a romantic lead, and I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it when I read it. So the next recommendation I have is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. So this is the retelling of 1001 Nights, and I recommend this mostly because of the romantic lead / villain. Again, here is a romantic lead who you don't know whether you can trust them or not. They're morally gray. The choices they make are questionable. We follow Shazzy, I think that was her short name, or her nickname, and she volunteers to be Khalid's bride. He is the king, and he's really young, and he's a monster because he takes a new wife every night, only to be killed by sunrise. And we follow Shazzy, and she volunteers because her best friend was one of those wives, and she vows to become the next wife to volunteer out of revenge for her friend, and she's hoping to kill the king. And somehow she manages to survive the night. She doesn't end up being killed the next day. And when I read this many years ago, I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. There is this kind of mystery element. You don't really know what's going on. You don't know if you can trust the king. You really sympathize with him, but you feel like you shouldn't because he's doing this horrible thing. And you're not really sure whether Shazi will survive the night. Night after night, you're not sure if she's gonna make it. I really enjoyed this. It is a duology. I preferred book 1, and I feel like you could read it on its own. But book 2 is still really good as well, and I highly recommend if you're looking for more of a romance. There's no magic in here, but it's a bit of a mystery, and if you like romantic leads / villains that are a little bit morally gray. The next book I have to recommend is maybe a little far-fetched. We're getting to the titles that may not quite be similar to Shadow and Bone, but I still recommend, and that one is The Dark Days Club by Alison Goodman. So this is a fantasy Regency romance, so set in the Victorian time. It's kind of like an urban fantasy. The reason why I'm recommending this one is because of the love triangles. So if you like love triangles, I do recommend this. There is a magic in here, but it's not a fantasy world. It's an urban fantasy, so it's set during the Victorian time, but in the real world. We follow Lady Helen preparing for her debut, and she needs to find a suitable match. She needs to find a husband because she has a bit of a reputation. Nothing that she's ever done, but her mother had a reputation for being a little wild or unladylike, and so she needs to get married. But she's noticing different things about herself. She's noticing that she feels weird energies in her bodies, and she meets Lord Carlston, and he seems to have maybe answers to what's going on with her and the mystery of her mother's death. This is, like I said, an urban fantasy. There is a love triangle in here. I do recommend it. I really love it. If you like Regency romance, fantasy, definitely recommend this. And I think the last recommendation I have you is not really much of a recommendation, but I should mention that Six of Crows, really good recommendation if you liked Shadow and Bone. So Six of Crows is the second series in the Grisha universe. I do recommend finishing off Shadow and Bone trilogy first before reading this, but if you're just eager to start that series, go ahead. It's independent of Shadow and Bone trilogy, and this one is a heist. It's still set in this world, but it's on like it's in a totally different country. We're following brand new characters, but if you like morally gray characters, if you like a heist, if you want just more story in this world, I do recommend this series. And I think that's all I have for recommendations. If you have any recommendations for me, I would love to hear what you think I should read next. So please comment down below. If you've read any of these books before, please comment down below. I love to know your thoughts and opinions about them. If you want more bookish content from me, just click on the video on the screen. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you have not done so. You can follow me on Instagram and Goodreads. And you know what? I want you to keep reading. Bye.